And I took on the world. I did. I took on the world. I was working up the ladder, and in hindsight, looking back now, I was masking very, very heavily. I was just really burnt out, I think, at that point, from setting aside really who I truly was in the pursuit of success. So when I asked for help, it was promised and never delivered. This isn't working for me. I don't recognise who I am in this mirror, and this is not what I signed up for, actually. I think for a very long time, I masked so heavily, and I tried very hard to not show vulnerability because...
Hello and welcome to Leaders in Disguise. My name is Gary and I'm your podcast host. In this episode of Leaders in Disguise, we meet with Linda Burt. Linda is an amazing individual, a female leader and a neurodiverse leader as well. She's recently been diagnosed with ADHD and Autism, has experienced burnout, and gives an honest account of what burnout looks like and what we all need to do about it. I've really enjoyed recording this episode with Linda. She's extremely honest and will learn so much. In a world where stigma still exists, we only have one rule on this podcast, and that's to be kind to our guests. Please show your support by also joining the Patreon community. Thank you so much for those of you that have joined so far. You'll continue to see pictures from behind the scenes, some additional podcast postings, and lots more in the future. So if you haven't already joined the Patreon community, then simply go to patreon.com/leadersdisguise, where you'll find more and more information and catch up with all of the community there too. Without further ado, let's jump into this episode. Linda, thank you. Finally, I get to sit down with you. I feel like I've been talking to you for years, and we finally get to meet. How are you doing?
I'm good, thank you. Yeah, it does feel like it's been a really, really long time. Surprisingly, only a few months, but I think these are the connections that last for a long time, those that feel like they've been around for quite a long time, don't they?
We've been, I guess, talking about the world of payroll, which we'll come into in a moment, for many years, having my own toe in the payroll world. Yeah. For my own sins, we'll get into. But I know you fairly well, and I'll get to know you even more today. There's going to be people watching and listening that go, Who is Linda Burt? What does she do? What's going on in the world? Give us a bit of a mini snapshot of you as a person in payroll, as a leader in the world of payroll.
Yeah, so I think, so I've been in payroll now for just shy of 20 years. I know, very youthful, thankfully. I can't tell. Thank you. So yeah, nearly 20 years, and I've been a leader now for, goodness, I think it must be something in the region of about 10 years, maybe a little bit more, maybe a little bit less. So I'm neurodivergent, so I obviously I'm a little bit quirky, a little bit different, and I come predominantly from the outsourcing or service provider kind of world, and that's really what excites me, to be honest. I'm really big on the employee experience, people just feeling good about payroll because it's such an emotive topic. So for me at the moment, I'm a director, and I'm working at the moment in the media industry, which is a really intriguing industry, very, very different to anything that I've done before. And I've been here for now nearly 8 years. So, and it's been an interesting challenge. And just when you think that there's nothing else to do, payroll just has a way of throwing so many more challenges at you.
I think we'll get into the world of TV and media, but being there in the last 8 years has certainly been an interesting one. So well picked to go into that. It's been a couple of turmoil episoes of years for you. We're going to get into it and get stuck into lots of things, and I'd like to talk to you more about your neurodiversity, or somebody. People keep using the word neurospicy with me. I'm not quite sure if I feel like I'm one of the Spice Girls when I talk about the neurospicy world. Oh, that's maybe not a bad thing. But
which Spice Girl would you be?
Oh, which Spice Girl would I be? Absolutely Jerry. Jerry was always my favourite. So, yeah. But she's the one that left early, didn't she? And
she did,
and built a career and said, "Look at me." So maybe there's not too much. Maybe she's a bit too much like me. So But yeah, we'll get into the neurodiversities, because I think it's really and you've got some exciting news with that you've recently developed and understood yourself a little bit more in that.
Yeah.
You absolutely, I'm really pleased that you've come here today to talk about this as somebody that is there as a leader. You talked about your director role. I know you're mid-change, which is exciting with that at the moment.
Yeah.
And as a leader, especially in 2024, we're going to talk about some things today that people aren't talking about, that you bravely said to me, and I've checked just before we started recording that you're still happy to talk about.
Yeah.
The first one I want to talk about is your own personal journey. And a few employments ago, you had 2 months off work. You were really burnt out.
Yeah. What
happened? How did you get there?
Yeah, so, I mean, I think this is, I will say, pre-diagnosis of ADHD and autism. And I've always been very, very ambitious. And I worked for a large outsourcing firm. And I took on the world. I did. I took on the world. I was working up the ladder. And in hindsight, looking back now, I was masking very, very heavily. And it's a big part of, unfortunately, the accountancy practice world. It is very far behind in comparison to other industries. So believe it or not, at that point, when I started there, I actually had black hair.
Wow. Blonde now, for those that can't say.
I am, yeah, exactly. And I have a very vivid memory of being told by the partner of that firm that I worked for, one of the partners at that point, if I wanted to be promoted, I needed to have blonde hair, I needed to wear high heels, I needed to have a dress, I needed to look the part. I did those things. Because at that point, I was so ambitious and I was chasing that promotion and moving up the ladder because I knew it was what I wanted and I wanted to continue being challenged. So I continued obviously on that journey for several years, and I was just really burnt out, I think, at that point, from setting aside really who I truly was in the pursuit of success and what I was looking for and looking at, as successful at that point in time. And it truly taught me a lot. And I know that I'd struggled with anxiety for a very long time, but even before that job. And in hindsight, with the benefit of a diagnosis now, it makes complete sense. But at that point, just chalked it down to anxiety because I was moving at such great pace. And it really got to a point where I took on one of their largest clients, and it was a brilliant job. I enjoyed it. It was very challenging, very demanding client. But I really enjoyed rebuilding that relationship after it had been burned by another colleague who had left. And but it just became too much. My workload became too much. And the cost of masking was that I just didn't have the energy to do that and continue at that same level for a prolonged period of time. So when I asked for help, it was promised and never delivered, no matter how many times I asked. And it got to a point where I just hit that point and went, I just cannot keep doing this. So I then had that time out with Burnout, and it was very helpful to have those 2 months out. And at that point, I felt, I think, extreme shame that I'd got to that point and that I was having that time away, particularly because in the outsourcing environment, in many firms, it's very, very under-resourced. And this just puts such great pressure on you and your colleagues. And you feel so extremely guilty for going on holiday, for being off sick, for taking that time truly to recover and rest so you can be on your A game. And I felt so truly guilty for leaving my colleagues with my workload, but it was what I needed. And the benefit of having that space was fantastic for actually helping me to recover, but also for me to have a bit of a hard look in the mirror and say, this isn't working for me. I don't recognize who I am in this mirror, and this is not what I signed up for, actually. And then it took me on the journey to actually explore my values, I think, at a much deeper level, and look for a company that really matched that.
It's interesting that you framing, I can hear what you're saying, and I'm listening back to it and thinking, you're talking about burnout as a really positive thing here. I'm sure it didn't feel like it at that moment in time, but
not at all.
The output of it, the opportunity that comes from it, is really. Forgive me, it's something you should have been doing anyway. Is being able to be reflective, but you were so driven, which we see in leaders, whether they're founders or employees within a business. You were so driven by purpose and ambition, would you say?
Definitely. And I could not see the problem until it hit me in the face. And that was, it really wasn't until it got to breaking point, until I got to extreme burnout, that I could then actually see that there was a problem.
What was the first conversation you had when you realised this phrase burnout? Who was that? Was it with a GP, a medical professional, or a family friend?
I think it was actually with a GP. I think you're right. So I think at that point been I'd been previously on medication to help control anxiety, and I went back to the GP and said, I'm really, really struggling here. I'd like to go back onto medication. And then we obviously got into the conversation, and the GP said, I will absolutely give you the medication, but this is at least a 6-month fix. You've got to commit to this. You've got to make some real changes in your life. And it's clear that this isn't just anxiety, you're really burned out. And you need to take some time away. So I'm signing you off for at least a month. Here's the month's sick note. You have no choice in this. And then let's talk in a couple of weeks about how you're feeling. And then obviously I got signed off for a subsequent month after that. And taking that back, I think, to my partner at the time and having that conversation, he was very supportive, which was, very helpful at that point. Brilliant. It was what I needed. But then, of course, there's always that worry around money to go, actually, this company only has, sort of 2 weeks sick leave. Where does this take us? And this is, I think it's really interesting when we're talking about the support that as a company, what do we offer people? And a lot of the time, it is understandably written into policies that so much is discretionary, because we don't want people to take, the mick out of the company and take advantage of good natures. But what it also does, it stops people actually seeking support for fear of repercussions. It's
a real catch-22, isn't it? Because preventative is, what do they say? Preventing is better than the cure, I think is the phrase.
You're absolutely right.
Escapes me now, but it's okay, we could be paying everybody sick pay to go off ill for 2 months, or we could be investing that money into making sure that you are self-aware, that you are spotting those signs of burnout, and you don't need to have a shock conversation with your GP, and you're saying to yourself, or somebody internally is saying to you, well done, you're doing a great job, I love your enthusiasm, I love your ambition, but come on, Linda, slow down, because actually you are going to burn yourself out. And that, I wonder whether that is the better use of money. It feels more ethically better, actually, because
it does.
There are some people that trigger warning for suicide here, but there are people that then go, it's too much, and they choose to go down a very dark route of trying to take their own lives. You sound like you were trying to manage it via a off the record, if you like, conversation with your GP. Did anybody at the office know that you were talking to your GP about anxiety?
No, and this is, and I think a lot of this also sort of pulls into the cost of true, very heavy masking, particularly if you're an undiagnosed neurodivergent. You're trying so hard to keep your head above water and move along and hit all of the same goals as everybody else and keep up with people, that I don't think you necessarily, I think it's very easy to not show a lot of the time. And this is a big part of it, I think, is if you are somebody that is capable of masking very heavily, and I am one of them, there is that piece. It's extremely difficult, I think, it can be difficult from a company perspective to support somebody until they say, I'm struggling. But then I think from the other side, it can be very difficult, I think, to really understand the depth of that. Because if I just said, I'm struggling, it doesn't sound bad. But if I were to break down in tears in front of you and said, I can't come in, all of it looks differently. And this is the problem. Unfortunately, it is something that pulls into that neurodivergent experience. Talking about emotions is very difficult. And so you do have people that will come to you who are, I don't want to say devoid of emotion, but they can present that because that's a control mechanism and that's masking to protect themselves.
It's interesting. We are talking about burnout and we are talking about neurodiversities, ADHD, autism. They're not exclusive to... No. Burnout isn't exclusive to neurodivergent people. No. And I just wanted to make that point really clear.
Yes, definitely. And masking isn't either. Masking is done by everybody. And this is exactly... It's, for me, obviously, I have obviously the viewpoint from somebody neurodivergent who's only recently found out. At that point, when I first experienced burnout, I didn't think anything at all about neurodivergence. I had no concept that I could have ADHD and autism at all. And it was just completely chalked down to anxiety because that's the only way that I knew how to frame it. It's the words that were available in my vocabulary at that point in time.
One of the other words that I want to introduce here is being a female, a women, a women leader.
Yeah.
Where does that play in things for you as a female leader in a business? Let's take out neurodiversity and say I'm a burnt out female. Yeah. What's the stigma around that from your view?
It's huge because there is this piece, from being a female and a leader, there is this piece of not wanting to be viewed as weak, as emotional, and a lot of the language doesn't help with this, where we're talking about, framing things as, she was very bossy versus, somebody that was very driven. Yeah. So the language is there that it does put a negative spin on things, and it is something that is picked up particularly for women who are coming up through the ranks and learning to be leaders. And so I think that is incredibly important to work through that with women that are coming into leadership, and help them work through that, neurodivergent or not. There are many, I think, sort of subsets of people that have additional challenges to manage. And outside of being female, we've got people that are from different ethnicities, not just white, and that it just brings a whole new layer. And this is it's really challenging. And an example of that is I have a lovely lady that I mentor. And have for a while on and off. And I spoke to her on LinkedIn only maybe a month or so ago. And she said, I'm really struggling to find a new job. And she's got really great experience. She's a lovely, lovely lady. But she is from a different ethnicity. And she'd come to the UK quite a few years ago now. And I said to her, as an experiment, on your CV, take your surname. It's obviously double-barreled, extremely long. Take off the part that doesn't sound like it's from a different ethnicity. And 2 days later, I got a message saying, I've got an interview and a job offer. Goodness. And it's so sad that still exists.
Still happens, in 2024.
Considering we look back and think how much things have changed over the last 5-10 years, and they have changed dramatically, but there are still so many things that do exist, this unconscious bias that we just need to really work very hard as leaders to help our hiring managers completely remove, and stop us from not hiring just such amazing people. Yeah. Does it matter what their name is? No, it matters how capable they are.
Ironically, an ex of mine has married somebody that is Malaysian and taken their name. And you can imagine the conscious or unconscious bias that is there with having that same name. So it's, I at the time I did think, unfortunately, that might harm you when you're looking. But I did try to think that past that, maybe a little bit naively. I just want to jump forward and actually congratulate you. So 2023-ish, you got your ADHD diagnosis.
I did.
And you walked in today and I was like, no, tell me this on the microphone rather than... And then you went, guess what? I've got my autism diagnosis as well. So congratulations.
Thank you.
I know that's a huge... It's an interesting word for some people to use, congratulations. But I know how important that is for you and how exciting that you finally... Somebody's got this... I don't conform to labels, but they're nice to have sometimes, aren't they? For finally understanding and how do you feel having had both an ADHD, that terminology that I'll use that not many people know yet, that ADHD diagnosis?
Yeah, so you're right, and it feels really strange, doesn't it? I think to use the word excited, but I think it is because I think, as you say, a label, although we discourage the use of labels in business, don't we? Because we don't want to pen people into certain areas. I think actually for me, having these labels are very helpful because it's given me something I can take away and research to my heart's content. If you know what something is.
As a true ADHD.
Yeah,
stereotypically.
3 a.m. Research sort of hunt. That's a great rabbit hole, isn't it? But I think this is the piece. If you have that understanding of how something makes you think and how it makes you tick, then you can understand to work with it and not against it. And I think that's really important because ultimately, if you're working against it, all you're doing is you're going to be going back down that rabbit hole into burnout. So it's really important, I think, to have that and work out, how do I reframe this and use this and utilize those strengths and, try to work through things that are a little bit challenging.
I know it's all quite recent. Has it changed the way that you lead yet? Have you started to see a change in behaviour about... I know you said to me initially you started overanalyzing too much. Yeah. That's quite typical. Has it started to come through... I guess you've known for a while now, but you've had that official diagnosis. How is that transformation going into a different type of leader, or was it always there?
I think it's been something, to be honest, that's been sort of slow work in progress for quite a few years now. And I think a big enabler to this is working in the media industry, where it's been really helpful, I think, to just be a little bit more relaxed rather than being in an accountancy practice where, shall we say, things are a little bit more formal, I think. So I think for me, having this first piece, I worked out a really long time ago, and I think it's probably been about 12, 15 years ago. I always realised my best work was done on a dress down Friday. And so I realised if I'm comfortable in my clothes, then I work better. So when I joined the company that I'm in now, and in the media industry, they don't have dress policies. They don't have dress codes at all in their contracts, which was very unnerving the first day. Yeah,
I was going to say quite hard to know what to do.
Yeah, it can be a little bit difficult to navigate at first, but then it's really given me that piece of, okay, great. Actually, I can come to work then every day in something that is professional, but comfortable. And I think that's that first piece. And then beyond that, you start then exploring and going, okay, what else makes me comfortable? What else do I really like? And I think it's just really important, isn't it? It changes for you, I think, your way of thinking and going, okay, so if I do my best work this way, how can I actually extend that to my team? So I know for me, obviously having ADHD, I am not a morning person at all. No chance. I don't really wake up until about 10:30, to be honest. Like, it takes me a long time to get going. I have a couple of coffees, sit down, read some emails, and then I'm 10:30. Okay, I'm ready to start thinking about maybe eating a little bit of breakfast, and then I've really sort of, I'm coming into my stride. So one of the first things that we did was to put in, flexible working. So it's just kind of that policy of don't really mind what you work, as long as it's reasonable and sensible. We're here to support the business. We've done what we need to do, but how do we support you? How do we work around your life when you need to, okay, things are a bit tough, start a bit later in the morning and work a bit later if you're a night owl. Fine. If you're an early bird, start early. These things shift and change. And I think that flexibility was incredibly validating for me. And I know that really helped my team. When it came to COVID as well, we were finally able to, we were given the go-ahead to change so that anybody that we hired and everybody in the entire team were completely remote and home working. They had options to be there in the office if they really wanted to, but 99% of the team went, oh my goodness, no. Being at home, in your own environment, you're comfortable, you control the lighting, the temperature, all of these pieces. And again, that was kind of the next step for me. So it's sort of, I think, just built up slowly over the years. And I've been very pragmatic, I think, and aware. I work a little bit differently to what the environments that I was sort of taught in. And I've shifted and changed those and put plenty of adjustments in to accommodate me. And then by default, they've accommodated the team as well. And then it's just that piece, isn't it, of talking to people, listening to them, build that trust and, that trust and relationship. I felt that there was a big gap in my previous roles where I wasn't listened to. And if I didn't have that trust, it's very difficult, isn't it, I think, to ask for those adjustments and advocate for what you need so that you can do your best work. And that's really, really helped me coming into this then and going, okay, I really had that was missing for me. So I need to really make a lot of effort to do that for my guys. How do I look after them all? And that's really, I think, been for me that focal point, stepping into the role of a leader. How do I support people? How do I help them? So yeah.
I think I'd like to talk about the payroll industry if I can. And specifically, we said this briefly earlier, the payroll services industry. So we're not talking about working in payroll in a company. This is talking about looking after lots of companies, lots of different people.
Yeah.
Having people contact you directly who work for a company that you can't control whatsoever.
Yeah.
What's the pressure like for you? And I can certainly talk about my own experience of it, but what's the pressure like in the payroll industry and how emotional can it get?
Oh my goodness, it's such a pressured environment, and especially when we're talking from an outsourced or service provider model to be on the other side. It's very locked down in some ways, so you generally don't speak to employees on that side of the coin. You're speaking with very high level people, and as somebody, if you've only just started your career, maybe you're only 2 or 3 years into payroll, I think that can be incredibly intimidating to suddenly you're having conversations with directors of, HR, finance, CFOs, CEOs. It's very intimidating, I think. And the pressure is enormous to get things perfect. And it's drilled into you. People are paying for a service. They're paying for quality. And you want to deliver that. But it's so fast-paced and often under-resourced that you often find you don't have time to look after your own mental health and well-being. You don't have also the time to really learn. You're learning on the job, and that pressure is extremely difficult. And it's, I think it's acknowledged in part in the industry. And they say, you're one of two kinds of people. If you're a person that can hack working in a service provider, or outsourced or bureau environment, or you're not. And it's difficult. The pace it's intense. It's very intense.
As a leader, you mentioned something there about managing your own mental health and well-being. I guess in a service provider point of view, you're managing your clients, you're managing your team.
Yeah.
So would you say it's really easy to forget? I feel like it's an obvious answer to this. It's really easy to forget about managing you and yourself.
Yeah.
Because you can almost be maybe in payroll, I found certainly I know you doing international payrolls at Germany and all sorts of areas that you cover.
Yeah.
I tend to find that as a senior, as a leader in there, your job is to basically go around and put fires out.
Yes.
So trying to put your own fire out on, it's quite, I feel like I could only do 10 hours versus 40 hours of doing standard payroll.
Yeah.
How do you manage yourself through that? How do you manage your own mental health and well-being as a leader? And I know there's no magic answer here. I appreciate that, but how have you done that?
Yeah, so you're right, and I think it is extremely difficult. You do become a professional firefighter, don't you?
Yes.
As a leader, that is, it really is what you're doing. And as you say, it can be extremely difficult to manage clients. Your own employees that are working with you to help look after and safeguard their mental health and well-being, as well as your own, whilst keeping everything turning properly. And it's an extremely difficult piece. And I think if you're an empathetic and compassionate leader, I think it's very, very easy to set yourself set aside all of your own sort of challenges that you're having in favour of looking after other people. And I think it's a real difficult area to sort of manoeuvre through at points. And I think the most important piece is, I think, for me, to have people around you that are there and supporting you, whether that's someone, it's a manager, whether it's friends. If you're not going to be on your own side, you need someone to be there for you and someone who's going to advocate for you. And it is a challenge. It is a real, real challenge. And I think this doesn't apply just to outsourced external sort of service providers. I think there is also that emotional difficulty and sort of turmoil that comes with, from an in-house perspective, managing payroll, because I've had, and it is really common, especially if you work within a company that has people on minimum wage or close to minimum wage. If anything happens, if the pay isn't to the penny spot on, you will have people phoning you up, and you will have people crying, screaming in real emotional anguish. And nobody trains you how to deal with this.
No. Especially when HMRC, I've been there before myself. I'm sure you have. When HMRC send you a notice and they say, this person needs to have all of this come off. Suddenly you get £2,000 worth of wages, but you lose half of it. So you suddenly get your wages down to £1,000 because HMRC sent a notice to you, but it's not got to their house. The postman's post person, shall I say, hasn't delivered it. It didn't go to the right address.
Yeah.
That person is in complete shock, and it's normally on the day they get paid or the day before when all their bills are about to go out. Yeah, it's a tough conversation, and normally people are shouting difficult. Or screaming or crying.
Yeah. And this is the tricky piece. You don't get trained in payroll how to deal with this. And I don't think that's exclusive to payroll, if I'm being honest.
Yeah, I hear call centres that talk about it. I work with a huge call centre I've done for 14 years. Yeah. And they support their team because people are screaming and shouting about their heating systems. Yeah. And I'm sure that's quite emotional as well.
It's really difficult, isn't it? Because you take on all of that emotional trauma from that person on the end of the phone call, and it's very difficult if you don't have that coping and sort of skill set available to you. You've not been taught how to deal with these things. So it's something that you do need to be really on top of, I think, as a leader, how to help and bring those people through. How do you help them cope with that and not take that away at the end of the day? But how do you get an adequate outcome that's going to positively resolve what's going on for that employee? Because it's really, really difficult for them. Let's be honest, most people don't understand how their wages are calculated. Most people don't even understand what a tax code does. Yeah. This isn't really taught in school, and it's a real gap. It's a real gap, and that, I think, there is a huge piece around education that's needed there for people, and there are some really brilliant organisations that are working on this, and I've got some wonderful sort of friends in the industry that work very hard going around schools to try and teach children about this as they're coming into school and starting to earn money. What does this mean? How does this work? To try and take some of it. If you don't understand something, it can be really unsettling when you feel that something's gone wrong. If you've got a better understanding of it, it doesn't feel as scary. So, and this is the piece, so you're teaching people how to cope with these very, very difficult conversations, how to get an outcome, but also not to allow that trauma to be dumped on them. And it's a real tricky balance to take that as a leader and not put it on yourself.
I'm just going to jump in. I'm sorry for spoiling your experience of Leaders in Disguise, but I've got something really important and really exciting to tell you. We have a brand new Patreon account. What's Patreon? It's a place where you can go, connect with people listening to the podcast, comment on episodes, look at behind the scenes footage, and get involved in this growing community of people that, like me and like you, want to break the stigma of mental health and well-being for leaders. There is an option in there as well for those of you that can dig deep and support us, because we need some money. We need some money to go on and keep banging the drum and raising the profile of mental health and well-being for leaders. So jump onto the platform. If you've got the opportunity and ability, then we'd love you to support us financially as well. But don't forget, you can go on there for free and join this amazing community too. I'll let you get back to the podcast. Thanks for listening. Is this where we introduce the word vulnerability and showing that no matter who you are, whether it's the person processing the payroll, dealing with that tough conversation that they've got to have with somebody, or not being able to get access to that person to explain it, where does vulnerability come into this for you as a leader? Have you been able to show vulnerability over the years, and how's it helped you?
Yeah, and I think for a very long time I masked so heavily, and I tried very hard to not show vulnerability, because I think it was wrapped up in that stigma of a woman coming into leadership as well. So I think there was a lot wrapped up in that, and I felt that I couldn't show that vulnerability, that it would be shown as weakness, and especially as you've been told, that it's them versus us, and it just really couldn't be further from the truth, to be honest. It really couldn't. So it's something that I think I've unravelled probably over the last a good 5 years, I think now, and I think it's actually a strength.
I completely agree. It is.
I always say to people that I'm, mentoring or managing, as they're learning the ropes of how to manage, how to become a leader, you really have to give a little to get a little. You cannot expect people to be honest and open and trust you if you don't show a little bit of yourself to them. You have to show a little bit of vulnerability. But there is that balance of also being careful, I think, who you share that with, and not allowing yourself to then be taken advantage of.
Yeah, and I think there is a real crossover. I've got to agree with you, as there are boundaries ultimately.
Definitely.
You can be vulnerable, but don't share too much.
Yeah.
But share enough, and I do this in workshops as well, is talk about vulnerability and authenticity.
Yeah.
Or just being real, just being you, just be yourself. But that is okay, but by sharing too much, there is an opportunity too. So it's really interesting, Leaders in Disguise and wearing a mask.
Yeah.
It's an interesting conversation to have, and I won't stay too long on this, because we'll be forever. People will be listening to this tomorrow. Yeah. I'm thinking this is a long car journey.
Yeah.
But certainly a little bit like, I won't go into some other areas, but it's okay to wear a mask some areas, because I talk about things as being, there's things that we talk about privately, and you and I have had a conversation to say, are you okay talking about this publicly? And actually, private and public, there's your boundary.
Agreed.
If you're happy to talk about things openly and publicly, then they're okay. But it's not wearing a mask to keep things private.
No.
They are just things that you are entitled.
They're just boundaries.
Yeah, they're boundaries. They're things that you can keep private, and that's okay. And I do think there are some leaders that overshare their private things that people then do exploit. Yeah. But ultimately, there are some people that I've worked with, I don't know about you, where I've shared my own private challenges that have been going on. So one private thing for me was my severe depression that I had. Since sharing that, I've created a real bond with people. I spoke to an investor who said to me, wow, like I've learned so much about you. I'd absolutely invest in you now. Like knowing that, even more now, knowing that.
It makes you personable though, doesn't it? It makes you a human being, and people see you rather than see a name or a number, an email address. And I think this is the important piece. It's getting back to seeing people for who they are.
Is it that word perfect that we've stopped children certainly using now? And what my good friend of mine said to me, she doesn't say practice makes perfect. She says the children learn practice makes you better. Yeah. And we learn from that. And it's perfectionism and this, to be the perfect person, this is what this looks like. And actually we are just perfectly ourselves. And it's perfect. And I was going to say, I'm not perfect by any stretch of the imagination, but I am. I'm just perfectly me.
You are
I'm
who
uniquely
you are.
Me.
Yeah.
And having some humility, I mean, that's another word we can throw in here. We've got dictionary 101 today. Having some humility and just admitting that you're not this perfect, this myth of perfection, that you are just you are real, you are vulnerable. Yeah. Some days you cry, some days you laugh, some days you don't do either. Yeah. And connecting with somebody on that emotional level goes, oh, they are real. I am talking to a real person, not an AI chatbot of a leader. Yeah. I am actually talking to a real leader. Do you think that's helped? Have you told your team about your ADHD diagnosis? What was the reaction? And
I've been really, really honest about my diagnosis, and it's actually been really positively received. And I really love this because I think, as you say, this is this piece about stripping away the mask. What are we comfortable with sharing publicly? I've got no problem with sharing that publicly. It's part of me. It's what makes me good at my job. Yes, there are definitely some challenges around that, definitely. But I think this is the piece. If you're looking at what do you look for in somebody, you're looking for a creative problem solver, somebody who can look outside of the box. I mean, odds are you might end up with somebody that's neurodivergent in that sense. And I think this is the piece. It depends what skill set you're looking for as to who you're going to attract into a team. And completely accidentally, in my team that I've got at the moment, and they are wonderful, they're such a brilliant team, I think we've got something like 60% neurodivergence. Completely by accident.
Or undiagnosed?
Bit of both. Some self-diagnosis, but predominantly formally diagnosed. Completely by accident. There's nothing at all that was intentional about this. And I think a lot of that has come from authenticity, about being comfortable, about being honest about mental health challenges, about challenges in life that do make life difficult some days. And it's not always easy to strip away what's going on in your personal life and come in and just stick a mask on and just bust out your best day's work. It's not going to happen. And so I think actually having really open and honest conversations with people and encouraging that environment and that culture of, real high sort of level of trust and psychological safety amongst, your team has been incredibly profound. And I really enjoy that, to be honest. I really enjoy creating that it's just a safe environment for people.
Sounds really lovely.
But it's been really good. And as I say, it's what I think is really special is me sharing my challenges and my diagnosis has then given people the courage to actually explore their own neurodivergence and end up with a diagnosis of their own, and understand themselves a little bit better, and how to alter their own lives so that it fits better for them. And I think there's nothing bad that comes out of that. I think being a little bit more open and authentic is positive. It creates a really great environment.
I like it. One of the other things that I want to talk to you about is the TV industry.
Yes.
Now, I know of your many years of expertise in payroll services. You've been, we joked about the amount of time that you've been in lots of different, from COVID right through to where we're at this moment in time. I've got friends in TV and they are really struggling, and there's some real high pressure in that industry.
Yeah.
How have you been managing your mental health over this last year? Neurodiversities aside, it's a really tough industry in TV and media.
Oh my goodness, it's such a difficult industry, and it has been, I think, from the point of COVID really hitting. It's an industry anyway that has peaks and troughs, and it's an industry also primarily built on freelancers because the model of how we make TV across the globe at the moment. But the difficulty is, COVID, we went through a period of, I think it was 5 months, where we were not allowed to shoot any TV because of obviously government legislation, obviously having lockdowns and whatnot, and obviously trying to protect people and keep people safe. Once obviously we got a little bit more of a grasp on how to try and protect people and how to manage and treat COVID, that obviously loosened a little bit. But nearly half a year for people just to not have any income, I mean, that's terrifying. And the furlough scheme that the government rolled out, it was not without fault, and it did not support the TV and media industry very well, if at all.
Self-employed and individuals and micro businesses.
Exactly. It was such a negative, I think, just sort of real moment on people's lives, and the impact was massive. And I saw a lot of people leaving the industry because financially they couldn't stay. And I can't even imagine how difficult that would be to walk away from a career that you've built for, say, 10, 20, 30 years, that you absolutely love, you've given your heart, your soul to, because you need money and because it's just not there in that moment. And post-COVID world, it's been still a rocky ride. We went through some really great, huge peaks, and then we're back in a low again now. And it's been persistent now, I think, for about 18 months. And it's difficult. I think the last survey that came out from BEC2, which is a union in the industry in particular that supports them, was something like 73% of freelancers haven't had any work in the last 6 months.
I think I saw something on that, yeah.
And I just don't even know how you would survive that. So again, we're having a huge loss of skill sets in that industry, and it's an industry that the world is changing. We're not really gravitating right now to the standard TV model. Let's be honest, how many of us turn on the TV and we'll go, oh, Netflix, or
we watch podcasts on YouTube
exactly.
like this? Absolutely.
Exactly. The format of media and television in particular is changing hugely, and it has been quietly been changing really for probably the last, I think, 10, 15 years, and it's really starting to bite now. So I think it's been really difficult to see people that you love working with. There's no work, and they are trying to work out how to use their transferable skill sets to move away from an industry that they've poured everything into, and that's difficult. And I think it sort of comes back to managing that concern and obviously that worry and all of those feelings that come along naturally alongside all of that, watching all of this sort of, you're in the eye of the storm, so to speak. you've got to practice a lot of self-care and a lot of self-love, and that can be very difficult when you're moving very quickly. But you do have to take time out for yourself. You do have to focus on, what do I enjoy doing outside of working? And I think for me, that's been really profound this year, to really take that step back and go, I'm actually more than just my career and what I do for a job. I focus so much of my energy into that. And it's really, I think, the issues that are going on and impacting the media industry has really helped me, I think, take that step back and go, I need to be more than just my work. I need to focus on things that bring me enjoyment in life as well.
It's interesting. Again, another very emotional way in which people don't realise that payroll, what payroll has to do, that ultimately you can go from one end of it, someone really angry and annoyed while they're getting 10 pence too late, or 50% of their wage, right through to somebody that is struggling, that they need their money because they've not had work for 12 months.
Exactly.
So it's
critical to get everything spot on, and it's a challenge, and it puts us under so much pressure to work out, how do we find any tiny little gap? How do we really close that? And especially if you're working with a business where you are under-resourced, that's so difficult to do that. And it's me and my best friend who's also in the payroll industry, and we always say this: it's so easy to lose sight of what really matters here. It's all about the employees. It's about their experience. Everything is about employees. Our job, fundamentally, payroll is a support function. How do we support our people? How do we support that business? But it's about the employees. How do we keep them afloat? Because let's be honest, if you're not going to be paid or paid properly, would you come into work every day if you weren't getting your money? You would not.
Absolutely.
It's a critical function that's often forgotten about.
I'll ask you a couple of speed round questions, if that's okay.
Of course.
So from your point of view, what do you do to manage your own, what's the one thing that you do to manage your own mental health and well-being that other people could take inspiration from in professional services particularly?
Yeah. Do you know what? It's something as simple as I have deliberately separated where I work in my house from where I have downtime away from work. So I have one of my spare rooms, and I shut that door when I leave. When I finish, I have absolute separation from work. I do not take work phone calls on my personal phone. I have a work phone for that. That divide is really important. And it's something as simple as, something that I do when I finish work. I come out, I give my dogs a bit of a cuddle, we have a little bit of a play, and then I'll sit down and do like a little bit of painting. So I'm really, at the moment, I really love little paint by numbers. It's really, really intricate ones if you want to go have a little look online. But they're things that then channel those thoughts. You have to channel everything into that for a couple of minutes. And I think it's just that bit, something very physical to sort of shake off the day and then focus that energy into something calming. And then once you've done a little bit of that, okay, what am I doing now for the day? Am I coming then? Am I going to cook some dinner or go out and do some gardening? What else? You then get on with the rest of your day. But I think it's important you close that door, you have those boundaries, shake it off, and then move forward.
Next question for you. What one thing, from your point of view, do you think we need to be doing as co-leaders, as a business community, to support the mental health and well-being of other leaders?
Oh, goodness. You know what? The first thing that would spring to mind, coaching. Coaching. Oh, my goodness, all day long. I think it's important. We both know that therapy is incredibly important for helping us and helping us on that journey. But the single most helpful thing that has ever happened to me is being given a coach, because it really helped me put things into perspective, and it really helped me reframe things and look at how do I help other people as well as myself. And really, I think just hammering home that point, I can't fill other people's cups if I've got an empty cup. So it has to start with yourself first before you help support other people. But it's really underrated, I think, and underutilized. Coaching is a phenomenal support.
Brilliant, absolutely. As a mentor, not a coach, but as a mentor, I absolutely advocate that. I think it's you talked earlier about mentoring somebody else, and I think that absolutely, you're right. You need somebody to keep looking out for you, keep giving you that self-awareness, keep checking in with you, but also certainly making sure that you're keeping on the right path and not losing sight of your goals. So yes, do you know, I haven't paid you. I didn't know you were going to say that, so I'm absolutely ecstatic that you said that. So absolutely. And then finally, for somebody that's listening to this, that's watching us, you're somebody that's experienced burnout. What would you say to somebody? What's that one sign that they need to spot that says to them, I might burn out unless I stop? In fact, I'm going to ask a two-part question.
Oh, goodness.
What's the one sign and what's the one thing that they need to do?
Oh, goodness. Oh, that's really tricky. That's really, really tricky. I think it's really difficult. I think it can be to see it when you're in the moment. But I think one thing that I have noticed is a feeling that does come is, I think you get to a point where you are not enjoying things, and you can recognize that, but it's, I think, not fully bubbled up to the surface. And I think it's when you get to this point where you are telling yourself every single day, it's going to get better, it's going to get better. And if you're repeating that over and over again, you're getting to that point where you're starting to dread what's coming. You know, if you get those Sunday scaries, you know something's not right. But if you are just getting really pulled down by those feelings and you're dwelling on them, I think that's your warning sign right there. Before you get to a point where you're in complete free fall, those feelings, don't ignore them. It's really, really easy to, I think, to try and set them aside and go, oh, it'll be okay. Like, I know we're in a bit of a difficult period. It will get better. But I think you do have to recognise that if that goes on for a prolonged period of time, it's really, really emotionally difficult and it will pull you down. And it's hard to pull yourself back up.
I was going to say one of the great tips that my coach gave me was Hannah, amazing PA, get her to spot when things are happening in your week and get her to question it. Yeah. And sometimes that might be, you've had a really busy week, haven't you? What's going on here? And she might say, do you want me to cancel that meeting for you? And I'd go, oh no, I don't want to bother them. And she'll say, they'll be fine, I'll cancel it.
I love that so much, that she's advocated for you though and looked out for you. And I think this is the piece for me. I didn't realise that I was in burnout, another separate period of burnout that I've had, until I had two of my really good friends. I went out to dinner with them and they just said, you look terrible. You really look terrible. What is going on with work? Well, you've hardly replied back to me for the last sort of couple of weeks. What's going on? And just say, you look knackered. You've lost your spark. And my boyfriend actually termed it really, really well the other day. And, looking at this period and said, you'd lost that grit. Normally you'd clap back if people were really pushing on those boundaries. And when you realise you get to that point where you go, oh, it's not worth it. I haven't got the energy to fight that, actually. All of those little micro interactions are things that are real red flags there. So having that support network around you of people that recognise when actually you're finding that difficult and advocating for you, I think is so important. If you can't see it yourself, surround yourself with allies. People are going to spot it. Yeah, exactly.
One day there'll be AI bots that will train and watch us, and our watches, our wearable devices will go, you've done this too many times today, so therefore you probably need to take a day off. Yeah, whether definitely. We'll just press snooze, perhaps, like we push our friends away.
How often do we do that?
Far too often.
So much. Yeah.
Often. Well, thank you. I think we've very quickly running out of time. Was there anything additional from your experience that you wanted to add that you felt was valuable for the people that are listening? We've covered so much already.
Oh, goodness. Yeah, we have really covered so much, haven't we? I think it's probably just that piece around neurodivergence and around recognising those, the telltale signs. Because I think... And
when you know them, you knew them all along. Trust your instincts, I guess.
It feels so clear. And I went through a period of time where I looked at autism and I went, God, I feel like this really resonates in so many ways. And then to have people around you to say, I don't know, I don't see that. I don't see that. And it's really easy to disregard your own feelings and set that aside. And I think it's really important for people to not do that. Listen to your gut. Your gut is right so much of the time. But I mean, we obviously spoke before this about we know obviously the challenges of the NHS, particularly around supporting, mental health and neurodivergence. And there are so many avenues, I think, for support that just really aren't shouted about enough. Self-referrals to be able to go to CBT, I think, is a really big one that most people don't even know.
So many places you can just self-refer and go straight to therapy.
Exactly.
And where my mother lives, I don't think she can do it. We looked at her area actually, and then looked at mine, and we're like, isn't it really interesting, the difference?
I think it depends down to the trusts, and that's the piece. So it's something that is getting better. That's it, exactly. It is, and especially while we're talking about, it's tricky to get an appointment with a GP. You don't always need it. There are other avenues for support.
You don't always need a diagnosis when you're doing ADHD.
No.
Autism, some, like you say, labels are great if you need them, but you can say, pick up the phone to self-referral and say, I think I know I'm autistic.
Yeah.
Can you help me transition? And they will support you with that transition and understanding of it.
And this is it. Self-diagnosis is also completely valid. For me, obviously I pursued a formal diagnosis because that was important to me. But I think it all comes back down to, and in the same way for being a leader, it's all about what does that individual need? What do you as an individual need?
Thank you so much. How can people follow you on your journey of Payroll?
Oh, goodness.
And I can see you're going to be this like neurodiversity champion of leaders of Payroll industry, and I hope the TV media industry gets back to where it is. But where do people find you? LinkedIn?
Yeah, LinkedIn, to be honest. And I like you say, I do mentor people occasionally from LinkedIn. I do usually have a couple of people on the go that I quietly do that, but I'm a quiet individual. I don't generally shout much on LinkedIn, but
so it's Linda Burt, Burt.
That's correct.
On LinkedIn.
Yeah.
And I guess that's the main place to find you.
It is, yeah, exactly. Like you say, if anybody wants to sort of talk about anything at all, then absolutely message me on LinkedIn and I will be here for you.
I can see you doing videos and shouting about the world, and I hope so anyway. Hope this inspires you. Thank you again so much.
Thank you.
You've definitely made me learn more about myself today. And I can see your processing as we've been talking today. So
thank you very much.
You're welcome. Thank you very much.